Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the IMT, the Institute of Military Technology, taking a look at two extremely cool Armalite prototypes. These are the only two in existence AR-16 rifles. They are chambered for 7.62 NATO, and they are sort of the intermediary between the AR-10 and the AR-18. So the timeline for Armalite, remember these are all being manufactured by Armalite, designed by primarily Eugene Stoner. They designed the AR-10 as their first military pattern rifle to actually go into production. And Armalite was not a manufacturing company. Armalite was an R&D and development company. Armalite was a subsidiary of the Fairchild Aircraft Company, set up largely because one of Fairchild's executives was a big-time gun guy and thought it'd be really cool to have a gun division at Fairchild. So they hire Eugene Stoner, they develop the AR-10, and in 1957 they licensed the AR-10 to Artillery Inrichtingen in the Netherlands for actual mass production. Interestingly, they actually negotiated a deal where Fairchild Aircraft gets the rights to build the Fokker 100, owned by the Dutch, and the Dutch get the rights to produce the AR-10. This ended up working out a little better for Fairchild than it did for Artillery Inrichtingen, but that's a whole separate story. It takes a couple of years to really get the AR-10 finalized and fully developed. Stoner spends a number of trips back and forth to the Netherlands, helping Dutch engineers to finalize and improve and develop the AR-10. By 1959, this work is pretty much over. Armalite has by this point also sold its IP rights. They've decided not to renew their contract with AI. They've sold the rights to the quasi-direct impingement system to Colt, and Armalite as a company needs a new product if they're going to keep working in the firearm space, because they no longer have the rights to manufacture or sell the original AR-10 and AR-15 style of operating system. So they get to work looking at some new ideas. And the core intent here was to come up with something that would be a little lower cost for manufacturing, something that would be accessible to countries that didn't have the manufacturing infrastructure necessary to do things like the aluminum forgings for an AR-10 or AR-15. And so they develop essentially a stamped sheet metal lower assembly, as well as a stamped sheet metal upper, using stamped sheet metal instead of aluminum castings. And in place of the original sort of direct impingement system, which they now no longer own the rights to, they bring in essentially the Tokarev short stroke gas system used in Russian and German semi-auto rifles that frankly still to this day is a keystone of self-loading firearms. And you put those all together, chamber it for 7.62 NATO, which was Eugene Stoner's by far preferred cartridge. He was never that big of a fan of the smaller 5.56 cartridge. And you get the AR-16. So these are developed initially between 1959 and 1960. The gun comes out in 1961. It's offered for sale. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at what exactly this thing is. So we're actually going to start here with the AR-12, and this is essentially the conceptual prototype for the project that became AR-16. The idea of AR-12 was, let's design a cheaper system, something that can be made without the infrastructure of casting that's necessary. Now, this particular rifle is actually made with a cast aluminum receiver, but it has been shaped such to mimic stamped sheet metal, stamped steel. Because basically it was cheaper as a one-off to take a casting and machine it down to the thickness and dimensions of a stamping than it is to make some stamping toolings for a one-off experimental prototype. In addition to the receiver, this rifle was made with a bunch of stamped sheet metal internals, again as a proof of concept for the idea of getting away from cast internal components as well. Everything about this was, how can we make this a little bit cheaper, a little bit more cost effective for smaller scale clients, someone that isn't the United States military and maybe doesn't want as many guns and doesn't have as much budget. Now, this rifle uses a new bolt design that has dual recoil springs, dual recoil spring guides up here, like so. You'll recognize this from the AR-18 because that's what it eventually became. But this allows the rifle to not need a buffer tube and spring extending out the back of the gun, which means this is now compatible with folding stocks. And when this was originally made, it used the standard Stoner gas impingement system. So this originally had a gas tube that went into it there. Now, in early 1959, Armalite sells the rights to the AR-15 to Colt. And at that point, they can no longer legally use that system on new production guns. So they had to change up the gas system, or had to change up the operating system. And what they opted to do was, at that point, bring in the Tokarev style short stroke gas piston. So if you've seen an SVT-40 or a German Gewehr 43, or basically any modern short stroke gas piston rifle, you have seen this style of 3-part gas piston with a return spring, gas sealing rings up there. That's what they went ahead and converted this AR-12 prototype to. So you can see up here they welded a plug in the original gas piston area, or gas tube area. That now acts as the impingement surface for your short stroke gas piston pushing right there. Worth noting here, in an effort to have it run smoother, this has 2 roller bearings on it. One is actually on the cam lug, and one is just on the bolt carrier itself. Those run in this stamped sheet metal rail that is riveted onto the side of the rifle, right there. By the way, they have this rail on the outside because you don't want to rivet, like you can't put steel rivets into aluminum, they're just going to wear out, so they riveted it onto a matching piece of steel on the outside. And so this is the beginning of what becomes the AR-16. Now, with that background, we can move on to the actual AR-16s. So we have Armalite AR-16 patent pending. This is serial number X101. It was manufactured after Armalite's move from Hollywood to Costa Mesa, California. 3-position selector switch there. And then here is the other example. This is serial number X100, so 100 and 101. This one's also marked 7.62 millimeter. These 2 guns are fundamentally the same, but they each have a few little minor differences in some of their construction because they are both handmade prototypes. So if we look at the features, we have an very much AR-10, AR-15 style selector switch, trigger of course. These have bolt handles fixed to the bolts and reciprocating. We have magazine catch here on the side, push that forward, and the magazine is a nose-in rock back. This one, interestingly, has a stamped sheet metal nose on it. We have a hold open tab back here, although it is down slightly. This, you'll see, this uses a feature that was carried over to the AR-18. So that's nose in there and rock back. 20 round capacity, pretty typical for 7.62 NATO caliber rifles at the time. The rear sight here is an aperture style on a wheel, so you've got 5 separate size apertures for different ranges that you can rotate through like so. They are blocked on the back, so you can only see the one that is at the top. This screw allows you to adjust the windage of the whole assembly, and then this screw down here allows you to adjust the elevation. The front sight is just a fixed blade with, again, 2 little protective wings that is mounted on the gas block. That's the front of the gas piston. It's not an adjustable gas system. That just allows you to open the thing up for cleaning. We have a bayonet lug. We have a really rather AR-10-ish 3-prong open flash hider. And then because these rifles don't require recoil springs coming out the back of the receiver, they both have folding stocks. So to open that up, we push this button, this latch down. That allows the stock to fold out like so. And then there's a little locking hook on the side that mates up with this notch on the stock. And it locks up like so. To release the stock, you push up on this side of the latch. There we go. And you can open it back up. I'm going to use our second example here as the disassembly gun because it's a little easier to get apart. Disassembly is done by pushing the recoil assembly forward right here. We have this pin that just prevents that from being done as a safety. So just tap that pin out of position, and then we can push this forward and pivot the gun open, like so. So we can pull out the dual recoil springs on their guide rod and back plate. Now, getting the bolt handle out here is a little tricky. There isn't, normally, there'd be a little extra opening where you can pull the bolt back and just pull the handle out. In this case, the bolt handle is held in place by a detent using a system similar to, for example, the Johnson rifle is sort of like this. You actually have to push in the center of the handle and then pull the whole handle out. So we're going to push this in, and then I can lift the handle out. It's complicated and weird. What you're essentially doing is pressing in these two little detents. When I push that in, it allows those detents to retract, like so. Anyway, that's how you get the bolt handle out. And then the bolt slides out. That bear any resemblance, you think, to that AR-12 bolt, or perhaps to an AR-18 bolt? Incidentally, we can now take the upper handguard off just by lifting it off, because the thing that holds the upper handguard in place are the two recoil spring guide rods. When they're in place, they lock in here and prevent the handguard from moving. So once that's removed, the handguard just literally falls off, and that gives us our 3-part short stroke gas piston. We have a lot of elements here that are very reminiscent of the AR-18. This is your full auto disconnect, which is connected to a trip right there. When the bolt goes forward, it pulls that forward, which pulls this back, which operates the disconnector. We also have the stamped internal components, most visibly here the hammer, that you saw on the AR-12 prototype, that you will also go on to see on the AR-18. This does not disassemble super easily like an AR-15 does, because we've got a coil spring for a magazine hold open on this pin. So I'm not going to take this pin apart. We're going to leave the upper and lower together. But we will go ahead and detail strip the bolt. So I've got a cross pin right there. This is an AR-18 bolt, which is very reminiscent, carries a lot of elements over from the AR-15. This pin holds the firing pin in place. So once that's out, I can pull out the firing pin. I can then pull out the cam pin, which has a roller bearing on it, and then I can pull out the bolt. So very much like a large, like an AR-10 bolt, but without the gas sealing rings. And that's your bolt carrier. This silver spot is where the gas piston hits it. That over time will wear off the finish. Got an extra roller bearing here for smooth travel in the track in the upper receiver. And then we do actually have a spring recoil buffer here on the back of the bolt to cushion its impact at the end of travel. That's held in place by a little roll pin in there, and I am not going to take that out because that's got a big hefty spring stuffed into it. There you are. There is an AR-16 field stripped. Now let's go ahead and just take a quick look at the difference between the two surviving AR-16 examples. According to the documentation, Armalite originally built two rifles, a 15-inch barreled carbine and a 20-inch barreled rifle. We have here a 15-inch barreled carbine. This is one that they, at the IMT, they're pretty sure that this was the rifle and has now been cut down. This now has approximately a 16-inch barrel on it. But if we look at these, there are some slight differences in the design of the sheet metal part of the handguards. We have a lightning cut up here that we don't have down here. The bayonet lug connection is slightly different. If we look at the back of the receivers, the 16-inch gun has this sort of square cut at the back of the receiver, where the 15-inch has an angled cut here. The pistol grips are slightly different. The 15-inch gun has a solid wood grip with just a hole drilled in it for the attachment nut, where the 16-inch gun has a pistol grip made with two steel plates that then have wood spacers on them. It's interesting to note that the handguards are actually laminated wood, so you can see the lines between the individual pieces. The 16-inch gun has like 1/4 inch, maybe 4 or 5 millimeter pieces of laminate, where the shorter 15-inch gun actually has wider ones. So we can see a piece right there, one that goes to there, one that goes to there, etc. And the longer gun also has a laminated buttstock, where the shorter gun has a solid single-piece buttstock. The two magazines are actually different for the two different guns, although they are interchangeable, so they both work, but the stampings are obviously quite different. This one has a machined front lug, where this one has a sheet metal front lug. Followers are different in there as well. So there really was, these are one-off prototypes. There's a lot of experimentation going on in this process. Shortly after the AR-16 is finalized and these two prototypes are manufactured, Eugene Stoner actually leaves the company. He goes to work for Cadillac Gage instead, and his work there will lead to things like the Stoner 63 system, which you've probably heard of, but those are subjects for a whole other set of videos. Back at Armalite, one of Stoner's former colleagues, one of his teammates named Arthur Miller, who assisted in the development of the AR-16, takes over as chief engineer for Armalite, and they look at the geopolitical global situation. They haven't had much interest in the AR-16 as a rifle. By this point, by the early 1960s, pretty much all of the major military powers that need a new modern rifle after World War II, they've all adopted one. They've gotten the FAL, they've gotten the G3, maybe they've gotten the AR-10, maybe they've gotten the M14. There just isn't a lot of market for this style of rifle with any serious significant clients, while at the same time, the 5.56 cartridge is showing promise as a growing market. The AR-15 is showing growing promise, especially with the United States military. And so Armalite decides to take this design, scale it down, kind of like they did with the AR-10 down to the AR-15. They scale this down, Arthur Miller being the project lead for this, into the AR-18, which is obviously extremely similar. This is essentially just a scaled down AR-16. This rifle would end up also not really being that successful for Armalite, but it loans its DNA to a whole generation of later military combat rifles, everything from the L85 and the Steyr AUG to the G36 to the Japanese Type 89 are largely based mechanically on the AR-18 system. So that whole program begins with the AR-16. Oh, extremely cool to get a chance to take a look at these. These are the only two known surviving examples. One of them was originally a carbine, one was a rifle, but the rifle has been cut down a bit here. At any rate, big thanks to the IMT, the Institute of Military Technology, for giving me access to these two total unicorn guns to show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.